Hi, I'm Elizabeth.
And I'm Cindy.
And we're here with another Feeding Frenzy for the Master Key System. We're on part 2, number 14.
It is often true that conditions of fear, worry, poverty, disease, inharmony, and evils of all kinds dominate us by reason of false suggestions accepted by the unguarded subconscious mind. All this the trained conscious mind can entirely prevent by its vigilant protective action. It may properly be called the watchman at the gate of the great subconscious domain. Did you get that?
I did, but that's going to take a minute to soak in. So let's do that one at a time.
It's often true that conditions of fear, worry, poverty, disease, inharmony, and evils of all kinds dominate us by reason of false suggestions accepted by the unguarded subconscious mind. Mm-hmm. What does that say to you?
It says to me that everything that's going on around in our little R reality can be interpreted through the subconscious mind as different, as false, as not actually what's going on, because we take in all our information through our conscious mind. Mm-hmm. And so if we don't use our intellect, our wisdom, our experience, our information through our 5 senses, in order to judge or decide what's going on around us, our first impression, what lives in the subconscious, what's been programmed there already, can make a false judgment on what's going on without the information from the conscious mind.
When baby elephants are trained to not run away, they put a stake in the ground and they can't get away because they're not strong enough to pull that stake out of the ground. So it gets in their subconscious mind, I can't leave here. And before long they quit trying because they can't leave there. Right. So then when they get bigger, grown, they can pull that stake out easily. They don't because it's already programmed in there. So if something were to come up to attack them or whatever, they would let the fear and the worry go ahead.
They would freeze.
They would
because
freeze
of that.
Because they wouldn't even think of getting out of there. Which most of us, untrained in that way, would think of, I'm going to get the heck out of Dodge,
right,
and would take off.
Right.
However, they've already trained their subconscious mind to say, I can't leave here. So they're going to panic and freeze. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You think that's a good example?
No, I do.
I think what it's trying to say is that when we don't think with our conscious mind correctly, or as he called it, right thinking earlier, then it allows our subconscious mind to go with what it already knows, which could be wrong in this situation.
Right. What came to mind as you were describing that one, was that old story about a small child asked her mother, why do you cut the ends off of this ham before you put it in the pan? And she says, I don't know, my grandmother always did it. Long story short, we go back and we find out from the grandmother did it because she didn't have a pan big enough for the ham, so she just naturally cut it off. But as each child in the generation watched, they didn't question why, they just did. It became the norm, so they quit questioning. So what that brought into mind is, when we don't use our conscious mind to question any longer, the subconscious can, it doesn't matter what information might or might not be coming through, the subconscious will just take it for granted. This is the way it is.
Right.
I don't have to know why, it just is.
This is the way it is.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Okay, all this, the trained conscious mind can entirely prevent by its vigilant, protective action. It may properly be called the watchman at the gate of the great subconscious domain. So if we start thinking about our conscious mind as the great watchman at the gate, keeping it out, the bad, and letting in the good, how would that change your life if you thought of it that way? How much would you keep out? Or how much would you think about before you let it in there?
Well, I think we would question everything before we allowed it in. When you were mentioning that, I was thinking of, you have talked about the subconscious being the computer, and when you mentioned the watchman at the gate, I was thinking of an antivirus or virus program.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying, that we place in front of to say protect my important stuff here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we put a watchman at the gate. So it's the same thing, basically. And we are given the five senses and knowledge to know what's going on around us so that we can protect the subconscious.
Right.
Now, I do think that before we have the conscious knowledge, before our conscious mind has grown or matured enough to start questioning, we take in a lot in the subconscious that will later we will need to question. Do you see what I'm saying? So we lay a layer there that we're going to have to go through regardless of what our experience is.
Right.
But I believe that if we use what he says is right thinking and question what's going on in our surroundings, then we protect the subconscious from further damage.
You know what this reminded me of?
What?
Back when Matthew was a baby, my oldest son, he was when he was so sick, and he was only 7, 8, 9 days old.
Yeah.
And he had this knot show up on the side of his face, and this was my wake up call, so to speak, because I was raised to trust people in authority, especially doctors.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the way I'd been raised. That's what was in my subconscious. I would do whatever a doctor told me to do.
Yeah.
And when I took him to the doctor says, well, I don't have a clue what that is. Let's get him x-ray. So I take him to the x-ray department, and I'm sitting there waiting for the x-ray and worried sick over my baby. And the x-ray technologist, or whatever he's called, comes out. And he says, ma'am, I don't know about you, but if this were my baby and he was only 9 days old, I would not put him in an x-ray. And I thought, oh my gosh, who do you trust if you don't trust a doctor?
Yeah.
And it made me start questioning everything.
Yeah.
Because I thought, who do I trust now if I can't trust
You can't trust him. Right.
So
yeah.
it really made me start judging what came through that filter and questioning the things that I had been taught in the past and that had been ingrained in my subconscious. So that's what I think of now. That's what I'm going to use to think of. Is, you know, question everything. If people tell us this is the way it's always been done and this is the way you have to do it, why? Yeah. You know, when our kids are first here, they ask why a million times, and we make them quit, or a lot of us do. You know, I used to get mad at some people that would tell my kids, don't ask why, just do it, because I said so. You know, I'd say, no, don't want them to ask why. I want them to be curious and to ask those questions.
Yeah. We shouldn't be afraid of the question why.
No, that's one of the best questions out there. Well, I guess depending on what you're talking about, but I always like for my kids to ask that question. So it's the watchman at the gate of the great subconscious domain.
Almost sounds like the great and powerful Oz.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah, which is sort of like what it is.
Yeah, it is.
You know?
Yeah.
Good stuff.
That is good stuff.
Yeah.
Shreen.